Hi, my friend, and welcome to the seventh ever episode of the Good Girl Syndrome show. Can you believe at the end of today, because I'm going to be recording two episodes today, it's going to be a month that I've started this, which is pretty cool. If you do not know me, my name is Julie Vander Meulen or Julie Vander Meulen, depending on where you are in the world. And the label I use is that I'm an empowerment coach for high achieving women. And I have developed a concept called Good Girl Syndrome. And it's what this show is all about. I'm unpacking with you in two different ways. So, either on the Wednesday episodes, I unpack a specific issue or question that's one of you has and has given me. So, like a mentoring coaching session. And then on Sundays, so the second time a week, what I do is that I personally tell you how I have handled this in my life, how it used to show up, how it shows up now, and like how I bridge the gap between the two. As you can probably tell, I'm a little sick, right? Hence this beautiful look. Hence why I haven't posted my Wednesday episode, and I'm gonna do them like this is the Wednesday episode, right? I'm gonna do them in one go. And Yeah, let's do it anyways. However this turns out. So for today, for this episode, I had the question of the lovely Maryse, whom I know, who is my client and that I really love and adore. She has written her question in French, so I took the liberty, Maryse, of translating it as best I could. So we'll go with that. So as always, I'll tell you what Maryse has asked me, and then based on that, I will riff. We'll see whatever comes up. That's what I would have said in a coaching session, basically. So here's the what she wrote. She said, "When we, so us good girls, right? When we finally set boundaries that were needed for a long time, how do we?" And there's two segments. So how do we move past the guilt we feel towards others for having changed, right? So the guilt towards others for having changed. And then the second how is how do we actually maintain those boundaries for our own well being, right? So we're talking about guilt here, right? And then we're talking about being able to maintain the boundaries. So a conflict there, right? Yeah. Do I prioritize myself or do I prioritize what I think in the moment others need or what they say that they want or need, right? And so Maryse also gave us a scenario which kind of explains exactly that, like what happens in a specific situation, which I think is very helpful. The scenario is basically, do I put the boundary when something happens? Do I put the boundary or do I get scared of disappointing others? And she says, like, in that. So either I choose to break my boundary because I think, oh, it's just for once, right? Um, and so she realizes her realization is that if she goes the people pleaser way, then she ends up hurting herself, which is not a good option, right? But she says then the other option is to stick with her boundary, but then if she does, then she will have a tendency to ruminate for hours on that specific decision, right? So I don't know about you listening to this or watching this, but for me, this really relates to the experience that I've had in the past, and sometimes I still have now, as I will say in the next episode that I will film right after this one. So, first of all, thank you, Maryse, for this question. And thank you for showing an actual scenario of what that looks like. Because I think, yeah, the reality of things is when you grow, then, like in the beginning, what you need is some simple ways to like get out of the patterns that you have. And then as you continue to grow and to heal, you need more nuance, right? Because you realize that, like, actually, depending on the situation, like there's different conflicting things that happen inside of you. And it's sometimes difficult to know which path to take because the old way is still very much the pattern that we used to, right? And the new way is still new, which means that one, we're not used to it, but also it means sometimes we're not very good at this new skill. And so sometimes we'll talk about it here when I unpack it with you. But I think sometimes it's also okay, like it's normal that we would go back to some of the old ways because that one we know how to handle is more elegant, right? It's also what we're used to, but it's also more elegant because we have more skill in that. I am way more skilled in being a people pleaser, right? Because I've done it for I don't know how many years in my life, let's say 30, 32 years of my life. I'm now 34. Than I am at being assertive, right? I have way more experience in the first one than I have in the second one, even though I have practiced the second one quite a bit in the past 2, 3, 4 years, right? Still, it's like I have way more skill in that area. And I think that's worth knowing. So let's go back to what you were saying. So the first option was like, um, you know, how do we move past the guilt we feel toward others for having changed? So, what I find is really interesting in that, I used to feel the same way. Now, not anymore. That part is okay for me now, the having changed part. But it is true that in our mind and in our society, like the conversations that we have with other people, um, especially people who have known us for a while, is that the expectation is we should not change because we create an imbalance with other people. Like they were, you kind of signed a contract, whether it's like with your, your one and only, or like with your family and so on. You used to be a specific way, and somehow the unconscious desire would be that you would remain the same, right? Um, and so we feel a sort of conflict inside of like, yeah, but I used to be this way, now I'm like that. Like this is hard on other people. And we have this inner conflict and debate inside ourselves that like the issue is not with other people, the issue is with us because we have changed, right? It's normal that they would feel any type of way. And I think to some extent there's some truth to that, in a sense that I think if we change some of our ways, or if we change some of our patterns, it would make sense that we could give a little bit of grace. Like we wouldn't expect people to, from the get go, know exactly how to handle this new version of us. Especially, I'm not talking about you, Maryse, but for myself, whenever, like I was saying, whenever I learn a new thing, I'm a bit chaotic. So sometimes I'm super strong, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, sometimes. So I would give myself some grace, as I'm learning this skill, but I would also extend that same grace to other people as I'm changing because they need to adapt, right? And on the other side, what I would say is that what I've come to realize with time and with like doing all these different things and being confronted with the reality that like other people did not like who I was becoming. They loved the other version of me, the previous version of me, partly because it was way more convenient for them. When I was a people pleaser and I was always saying yes and I was always the smiling girl, doesn't matter if I was suffering inside and they did not see that. They really liked the version of me who would do everything for them, right? So I think that we'll talk about comfort and convenience afterwards, right? But I think that what I realized with time was that what a strange concept we have in our society that human beings are not supposed to change. Like everything in life, like the way that life works, everything constantly changes. Like there are no guarantees, there's seasons in life, right? There's like aging, an aging process. Like there's all these things about time and life where everything evolves, right? And somehow we feel like our own personality, our own being, our own beliefs and values, and even like likes and dislikes and all these different things shouldn't change. It's a strange expectation to have of ourselves and of us as human beings as well, right? So, my approach to this would be, in terms of how you move past that guilt, of like, oh, I have changed, it's to accept it. I know it sounds simple, but it's really to like accept it and see it as something to be proud of. I know that it's like it goes counter to what our society tends to tell us, right? Um, Overall, right? I'm making a simplistic, generalization, but I think it's really that, like at the core of it, it's like you feeling proud that you have changed and you understanding and saying to other people, what's normal to change, like we all change. Like if you don't change, there's something, you're resisting something about life, right? And so I think that being able, the first step is changing yourself, right? The second step would be accepting that, like this change is good, right? You desire this change, you wanted this change, so this change is good for you, right? And then it's also being able to say that on the outside, to not just say like I've changed and these are my new ways, but just to have these more overall conversations around change, and that like that's a positive thing. It's an inevitable thing, but two, it's really a good thing, which means that then I imagine what that would poke is that then that means that in front of you, if you have someone, I'm making assumptions here because I don't have the whole context. But my assumption then would be in a coaching session, I would ask, like, has anyone said that it's not good for you to change, right? If not, then we go back to like, this is you in your own mind with the old beliefs that you inherited from somewhere, that you're supposed to be super loyal to everyone, but also to the old version of yourself, which is not completely true, right? The loyalty, right? Like one, loyalty is a value that you get to choose if it's part of your mental landscape or not. A lot of us good girls, we overvalue loyalty and we make it mean something that is impossible to live by. Because if you do, then you become completely disloyal to who you truly are inside in order to maintain, to be loyal to other people and their desires and their needs, or to the old version of yourself, or to the expectations of others to you. So, something to look at there. But here I'm going to assume that what's happening is that you have someone or someone's, like multiple people, who, feel like you actually shouldn't have changed. And what that makes me feel is, if I take it back to me, if this conversation was happening with me, I'm always changing. So my expectation of you, even though perhaps some of the new things that you can bring to the table might be surprising to me, or, perhaps they're less convenient or whatever they are. But my expectation of you would be that you would be changing, that the person that I met 6 months ago, right, would not be the same as the person that I saw now. It's the same person, but like there's variety to, like, and it's normal, and I would love it, and I would be into it. Perhaps some things I will like less than the version that I had before, right? But I'm expecting that. And if I care about you, right, and if I want you in my life, then I will lean into curiosity, even in the areas where I'm less convinced by like the path that you're taking. And so then my interpretation of that would be that the other person who's in front of you, they do not want to change, right? So the issue is not so much that you are changing and that you are creating chaos. The issue is because now you're changing, you're finally stopping to resist your own inner truth, or like resisting the flow of life, if I can say it in a more poetic way. Then now what that reveals is the other truth of your external world, of like who in your world is actually resisting change and life and all of that, right? And so it's like the uncomfortable thing for a good girl. Other people, they have no problem with that, but for us, it's like it's much easier when like we're the problem because we can fix it. Now it's like saying to someone else in a very kind way, right, and graceful way, that like, have you ever considered that you have not changed in 20 years or 10 years, or I don't know, how long it is, and that perhaps, as life has and new circumstances have come up, and, life has completely changed and our world has changed and new events have occurred, that like some things who should have changed with time and they haven't. And so I would say that the confrontation here and what's uncomfortable is that then it's coming to terms with the reality, not just that you have changed, but that others have not. And are you, and so I would take it back on you, are you okay with other people not changing? Right. So isn't it I'm trying to flip it in the sense that sometimes, because of our own patterns as good girls, we tend to internalize everything and take it all as if like it's our fault and the issue is us having done something. What if it's the opposite? I'm not saying this in a blaming way, but I'm saying, what if your mind is biased towards that? And what if you were to flip that story? How would that conversation go? Like if you allowed yourself, even before you have that conversation with that special someone or this environment that you have, how do you honestly feel about the world around you not changing? And those people who you think are judging you, and perhaps they are, right? How do you actually feel? If you allow yourself, you don't have to tell them. How do you actually feel about them? How does that feel, right? Um, and so I think that then what would happen is, instead of feeling the guilt for you changing, I think what would happen is other emotions that are perhaps less comfortable because we're less used to them, that would arise. Perhaps resentment, perhaps anger, right? Perhaps this other area of negative emotions, right? Constructive but negative emotions that most of us good girls we're not so familiar with, and we do not like them. We do not like, a lot of us do not like anger. We much prefer feeling guilt and like, dealing with this inside than having things to say to and blaming. And I'm sorry, you can hear how I'm sick with my voice. I'll keep rolling. Hopefully I can keep my voice till the end of this video. Um, so that's my invitation to you, Maryse, in this specific case, but to anyone who's listening or watching, is like, ask yourself the hard question of like, if you were to flip that, like, how do you actually feel about those people, right? And then from that space, what do you want to do about it, right? Um, so that's one part. Then for your second, how do we, right? You said, how do we actually maintain those boundaries for our own well-being, which is another really good question. And I'm thinking it's very related to what we were saying before, right? Um, it's, I think the assumption, again, I'm making assumptions, right? The assumption here I think in what I'm hearing or like reading is that you are maintaining your boundaries for your own well-being against something or someone, as if you keeping your boundaries, putting boundaries and keeping them is somehow, is what I'm hearing, but perhaps I'm mistaken, is somehow hurting or costing someone else. And my invitation to you in a coaching session would be, is that really true? Is that really true? Like, is it really? Because we have a tendency as human beings, and us good girls have a tendency to do that too, to see everything in black or white when there's things that we are not used to deal with, or when it's the things that we struggle with, right? We go and it's this or it's this, right? And it's very dramatic inside of us. Again, same for me. When I get into that space, it's the same for me. Um, and I would say, like, I would suggest again, like, how about we broaden the scope of this thing? Because on the short term, right? If we think short term, which is what we do when we are in survival mode and we want to help others and we feel guilty and all, we look at the short term. And in the short term, then our putting our well-being, if I keep your words, our well-being first, means that someone else's comfort, right? Their comfort, their convenience will be shaken, right? And so to me, even in the short term, nowadays I'm capable of doing that. In the past, I was not. It was not legitimate. But now when I look at it, I'm like, do I really want to like be extremely tired because someone else, would feel more comfortable if I did those 2 hours of thing for them when they are fully capable of doing them, you know? And nowadays I'm like, no. Like, why is my rest less important than someone else, right? And I'm still a generous person if you meet me and so on. I will still have a tendency to prioritize other people, but there's this little thing in my mind now where I'm like, wait a second, like especially people from my past, right? People who I've known my whole life who have these types of ways of thinking where they think that their own comfort and convenience is more important than my own, despite comfort and so on. Sometimes, really, my well being. They're like, it's not just one more thing for you, right? And I would have, because I used to behave like a superwoman for my whole life, I'd be like, yeah, no, like for me, this is nothing. Just give it to me. And now I'm thinking, actually, no, I'm not a superhuman. Every single thing that I do has a cost, right? Am I willing to pay that cost or not? Like, is this worth it or not? And also, very specifically, when I see that someone is really valuing comfort, and I invite you to do the same, Maryse, in this specific thing, is it about their comfort? Because for me, comfort is not a legitimate thing anymore for someone else. Like, I will not sacrifice something that is deep for me, like my integrity, right? My integrity is very important to me. My well being is very important to me, right? And if I see that someone else has no care or very little care for these big things for me as a person, but also just with every individual, I would not want you, specifically Maryse, but anyone else, I would not want you to be out of integrity so that you can make me feel comfortable in the moment. I don't want that. You know what I mean? Like, I really don't want that. And if I were to realize, because we're human, sometimes we can make mistakes. If I were to ask you to do something for me, and then I realize you have not, I'm making an extreme example, but if you have not slept all night to do that 2 hour thing or that 1 hour thing, that just because I was too lazy to do, and I felt like it's too hard for, like I was in a type of victim story, I would not feel good about myself having asked you. You know what I mean? And so I think that's a good thing to look at. Like, is it for their comfort or not? And to me, comfort has become a symbol of like, I will not, how do you say that? Compromise myself, my well-being and my integrity and like how I feel about myself to, to accommodate for your own desire for comfort. No. Like life is hard for everyone, including for me. And so you can do hard things. If it's just for your own comfort, you can do hard things, right? So that's for the short term. But I think also for the long term, and that's how I initially started being able to have boundaries and keep them, is I can't remember who said that to me. I can't remember if it was during my perhaps it was during my Tony Robbins initial, I think you all know that I'm in the Tony Robbins world. I'm what they call a senior leader. So I volunteer about once a month in those events and I do quite a few things. I coach, I mentor. But I'm also one of the people who are leading those meetings, right? And yeah, teaching and so on. So it's a beautiful type line of work. And there's a lot of principles that I apply to my life and also to my coaching and mentoring. that really come from there. Like I'm really inside that environment. And I think someone in there um, had asked me um, if I was not, by always trying to take care of others and like making them comfortable, besides the fact of like what it's costing me, because I was getting nowhere out of there. Like when I was thinking of the cost for me, I was like, I'm a generous person. That's how I identify. My contribution is important for me. So they could not get me out of my own way from that point of view. And so they flipped it and they said, have you ever considered that you could be an obstacle to these people's growth? And I was like, what do you mean? And like, if you're always providing that comfort, that comfort, and like they're never facing their own demons and their own things, how are they going to evolve as a human being? How are they going to be happy? How are they going to feel proud of themselves? And how are they going to change for you and for others? And I was like, oh, wow. And then the further thing was like, how is this impacting others? You enabling this behavior in this person in front of you, how is this impacting other people? Like, if I had, basically, she was saying, if I had the courage, if I, Julie, had the courage to speak my truth to this specific person who was behaving in a way that wasn't actually right, right? Or wasn't the best, right? They were not just doing that with me, they were doing that in general. And now they had proof from me, as Julie, right? They had proof for me that that was an okay behavior. So they were perpetuating that on in other spheres. And I was like, oh my God, I did not, I had not realized all of that, that I was actually, for my own comfort, right? Because I'm more comfortable with over delivering and overworking and like, being generous and being in this position where I'm being needed and all those things. So for my own comfort, even though it was costing me a lot as well, um, but I didn't have the courage to have hard conversations. So for my own comfort is how I interpreted in that moment. I was being an obstacle to this person's growth. And now that really changed my whole life. And so my invitation to you, Maryse, in this specific situation is to think like perhaps it's not an either or. Perhaps you maintaining your boundaries and putting your well-being first is actually the best thing for you, but it's also the best thing for other people, right? In terms of, they take responsibility for their own lives in ways that perhaps they're not right now. That right now they don't have an opportunity to do. I'm not saying it's your fault at all. First, I don't know if this is the truth, but if I'm imagining the scenario, I'm not saying this is your fault, but I'm saying if you were to remove yourself from specific situations, this person would have no option but to find a solution within themselves, right? And to be bigger than what they think they actually are. And also, because in your specific case, I know you have children, I don't. So it's harder for people to do that with me. But if I had children and I think of having children, that's something that I would love. Sometimes I think of my behaviors and I think, what am I teaching to my children? What would I be teaching to my children in my case, right? But for you, what am I teaching to my children when they see me behaving in this specific way? Like, is that what I really want? So it's not anymore about your own well being. It's also about the well being of your family, of your children, of your friends who are seeing your behaviors, right? So there's a larger impact there, and perhaps that can help you too in that decision. Um, and then I'm going to go into the scenario where you set like two different options that like perhaps I can break my own boundary just for once, right? And then you were saying, that people pleasing it ends up hurting me. And in general, I agree with you. I think that in general, overall, 80% of the time is my rule in my head, just so that I don't fall back into the pattern of beating myself up when I'm not perfect, right? Um, so 80% of the time, I would say I want to live in with integrity, right? I want to live with integrity. I want to live and know like to be completely aligned with who I really am and how I really feel, and to be courageous enough. To me, courage is a big thing that I have been working on. I would be courageous enough, to speak my truth and, in a way, like advocate for myself. And yet, what I would also say from what I read here, and again, I might be making an assumption, but my assumption here is also that um, I can see that thing why I brought up the 80% to 20%, the Pareto rule in this context as well, is because I think it's also a little unreasonable to have an expectation of yourself that you will always be in integrity with yourself and that you will always put your well-being first. At least where I am in this stage of my life of having worked with this, perhaps you're further ahead, right? That's a possibility too, that this is my own limitations. But my sensation right now is that I think if you wanted to, you could also give yourself some grace in a sense that I think that sometimes, not all the time, right? If like your main way of being is like 80% of the time you put your well-being first and you're really in alignment with yourself and you're doing the things you actually really want, right? That's a really good life. And if like the rest, like 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever that is for you, from time to time, if you slip and like, you put someone else's well-being first, either because you think that in that moment that's what you really want to do, that's what feels right, you know sometimes I feel that way, that I'm like, I'm going to stick with the sleep thing. I could really use some extra sleep, but then someone says something to me, like for example today, I could really use some rest, right? Because I've been traveling, I've been sick, and so on and so forth. But my best friends are now moving. They have a little baby, they have a cat, they have a baby dog, they have a lot of things to do. um and so they are in a process of moving and they need to clean their house and they have until tonight to do it. So I'm going to go there, even though I'm very tired. I would rather stay in my bed or cozy in my house, but I'm going to go there, right? Not because I'm not conscious of my well being, but because I think that for this one time, right? I'm taking this example. For this one time, I think it's worth it. It's like I'm conscious that like I'm making this decision. They are conscious of me making that decision as well. I do it out of generosity, right? I'm choosing, basically. I think the distinction is there. I am choosing that right now I will put them first instead of me, right? But doesn't mean, but tonight, I have decided I will come back here early because I want to go to sleep. I want to spend time with my grandma that I haven't seen for a few months, like all these different things. So I will go back to putting myself first afterwards. So I think that's one scenario that for once it's okay if I consciously choose it. So I would say pause. If that's the situation, pause. And what do you want to choose, right? And if you do not choose it in a sense that like it's not conscious and you just said yes to the thing or you did, you went back in your old ways, I would say even more grace to you that like can you believe that a few months ago you would not even have realized that you were doing that? Like, this is massive progress. And so, while I'm not saying please keep slipping, that's not what I'm saying. I'm also saying sometimes as good girls, because we're also very high performing women, we have a tendency to be extremely hard on ourselves, and our expectations of ourselves are a little unrealistic at times. And so, I would also love to suggest here, I hope it's the right thing, for you right now, because I'm not seeing you, but I would say, hand on the heart, like you did good. Even, even if you slip from time to time, this is still a lot of times where you do things right. And you can always choose again tomorrow, right? And you can ask yourself for forgiveness, you with yourself to say, I'm sorry. Like, I talk to myself all the time out loud because I know that it makes a difference for myself. But I'm like, I'm really sorry I made that decision. Like, in the moment, I didn't know any better. I slipped back into the pattern. And instead of making it mean, because I was really a pro at beating myself up for hours and hours and hours of like how I made that mistake and and didn't respect myself. And now I'm just like, okay, well, I'm human. Sometimes I will go back to my old ways, and that's okay too. And next time I'll do better. And or if it's something that I said to someone and there's still time, I will, find my courage in the moment to say, hey, you know what? Like I said yes to this thing, but actually now that I'm like back with myself and I'm realizing I'm going back to my good girl ways, and this actually doesn't feel right to me. So, I'm not going to be doing that. Um, and that I find helps a lot. And nowadays that I have the right people in my life that I've chosen, I can say that. I can say that to pretty much anyone in my life. And they're like, oh yeah, cool. Okay, cool. And they don't care if it's inconvenient for them, right? They don't think that way anymore because they prioritize me too, just like I prioritize them. And the last thing I'm gonna say, and then I'm gonna end this for today, for this episode, um, is you were talking about ruminating, right? Like, that if you do put a boundary, but I would imagine that even if you don't put a boundary, that like there's some rumination, was what you were saying. You will think about it for hours on and on and on and on. And I would assume that this rumination is different things. One of them is probably some doubt it can appear in different ways, right? But I would assume that underneath it is like a lack of trust in whether you made the right decision or not, right? Or anticipation of what the consequences of putting a boundary will be, how will they react, right? Um, and or also could be some resentment. So when we go into the anticipating how they will react, usually it's like we start catastrophizing about like all the different ways that they could react. And we start thinking, then we want to feel justified, right? And then we start thinking about all the ways that like, they did that thing once and that was not, or many times they always do that. Like we go in this loop of like all our negative emotions, like all the things that are unexpressed, basically. And we haven't been able to let them go. We continue and continue and continue to think about them. And so the real thing behind it is, if I put all these things together, to me, how I see it, if I were to take it for me, I would be thinking it's a question of, do you want to let that go? I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying a lot of us women, we carry things in different ways, right? In different ways. We carry things on our back way longer than is needed, right? So we sacrifice, right? Superwomen, all these things, but also in our minds. Then afterwards, instead of releasing the thing, like making a decision and releasing the thing, we continue, 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 continue. And to me, how I see it nowadays, because of this Tony Robbins world, is I heard this one thing. Actually, that wasn't I learned that in the Tony Robbins world, but I saw it elsewhere. I can't remember the name of this woman. She's a researcher. She was talking about how I saw her in a podcast, and she was explaining how it takes the real thought that you have, the negative emotion about it, whatever, the negative emotion that you have actually only lasts 90 seconds. That's how your brain works. And that after those 90 seconds, if you keep repeating it, it's because you, consciously or unconsciously, are you want to like go back and like think about this thing. You go back and think about this thing. You go back and think about this thing. So it's like us in our minds, who are activating that. Like basically that like biologically we should not. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but what I am saying is that there is a way to train your mind. For me, once I know things, it's much easier for me to make better choices. And since I've known that actually my real thing, the real thought and the negative emotion, this little loop is 90 seconds, then when I think that I used to stay for days and months, for some things, years with something, it gives me a perspective and I can actually see it when I'm honest with myself. I can actually see myself, like what I was doing. I was the one perpetuating this thought. And what she said is like, how you get out of that is you make a decision. You make a decision of like what to do with it. And like you decide that this is the course of action for now, and you do not put it in question anymore. So we go back to basically a form of self-confidence and self-trust, which potentially not specifically you, Maryse, but potentially you, anyone who's listening to me or me, potentially in the moment, we don't feel like we have that or we haven't built that skill yet, right? But that's how you build it. So the issue with always wanting more confidence and more trust, which I have had myself, is that actually it won't build itself like that. It's not that it was a given and that you don't have it. It's that you have to build it. And in order to build it, you have to make those decisions. And so it would be, if I were to say, I'm seeing a picture of my lovely boyfriend in front of me there. So I'm going to take an example from him. If he were to now ask me, I don't know, he wants to go out and I don't want to go out. And I know that it was really, really special for him, but I'm really tired and I really don't feel like going. Like I'd go next weekend, right? And he's really disappointed, right? He's really disappointed because I don't know, this hockey game was super important for him. I know it sounds trivial, but let's say that it's not, right? Let's say that to him it's really, really important because it's his favorite team. He used to be a pro player, whatever is the scenario. It's not true, but let's say that it is. And so the guilt could be really real, right? But I can go and I can make a decision, and look inside myself and think, do I want to do this for him today or not, right? Let's say that in this context, I tend to like say yes to these things. And this is a time where I'm really tired, right? You can see my eyes. I'm really tired and sick. And, like, actually, I really need to take this time for me. And when I go back to when we were talking in the beginning of this video, I flip the story. If I flip the story, I'm thinking that actually, if I were completely honest about how shitty I actually feel, my boyfriend would be taking care of me in this moment, right? He would be thinking, oh, no, of course we won't go because you're tired and like that would be, and it puts things into perspective for me that I'm like, yeah, I made a decision. I'm going to make this decision, which is that for now, we are not going to, I mean, at least I'm not going to go tonight. I'm not going to go to this game because I would like to take care of myself, right? It's up to him whether he wants to go and do his thing or if he wants to stay in and take care of me. More points for him if he stays with me, right? For me. But if he doesn't, that's life, right? He has his own, it's his own decision, 90-second decision to make, right? And I can make a second decision so that I can feel comfortable, which is, but you know what? Next week, if I feel good, which I would imagine I will for sure go there and I'll make it super special. And why I'm doing this in this funny way is that because then now everything inside of me feels okay. I am in integrity with myself, right? I feel aligned. Most likely my boyfriend is very kind, so his reaction would be, of course we don't go, right? If I voice it, and of course I'll stay with you and I'll take care of you and we just give the tickets to someone else and we go next week, whatever it is, right? Which makes me feel cherished and taken care of, right? And on top of that, I myself, for my need for contribution and what I could feel guilty about, I actually have a plan for how I'm gonna, how I'm gonna move towards the next thing, right? That I know that like next time I'm gonna go and I don't know, I'm gonna buy popcorn or something, or I'm gonna do something special. And so that not for him, for me inside myself, my mind now is at peace. I can just go to my bed. I can feel amazing, I can feel in my recovery and everything's good with me. Um, so that would be my advice to you on that latter thing is think of those, see if this works for you, this idea of the 90 seconds, because for me it really does. And what is the decision when you're like overthinking? What is the decision that you have not taken? What part of you needs a decision that you have not taken? And my assumption would be that if you look for it, and I specifically know you, so I know that if I give you something, you'll figure it out, right? But my assumption would be that you will find a little something. There's a part of you, the part that feels guilty, or every part, I don't know, there's parts of you that need you to make a decision that you haven't made because you're weighing all of the different things and it won't help. Thinking about it for 10 hours won't help. So you need to find a way to let that go from your mind. Doesn't mean that it won't come back in 2 hours and an hour, right? It's thoughts, right? They keep coming, but you can have them 90 seconds, make a decision about them, let them go. And it's like a practice, like it's like a spiritual practice, basically. So that was it. I hope it helped, Maryse. I saw that you put a second question as well. I'll probably do it in with the next year in 2026 because I have something else planned for next week. But thank you so much for all the questions that you put in my Google form. And thank you specifically for this one because I think for me it was useful even like thinking about it and unpacking it as I was speaking to you right now. And I'm sure that it will help many, many women. So thank you so much for your help. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, that it was helpful. And if you liked it, please put a little thumbs up, leave a comment below if you have any question, or if you just want to say hello. And if you're not yet subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel. I will see you. I mean, I will pretend like I will see you in a few days, but I'm actually going to go and record the next episode right now. See you in a little bit. Bye.